concise definition of the goal of leadership. And I think it's to help others achieve more than they would otherwise. In other words, without your influence in their life, they would not accomplish as much as if they had you in their life. If that's not the definition of leadership, I don't know, or the goal of leadership, I don't know what is. Because we want, as leaders, the whole objective for us to be involved in having that relationship with someone else is to get them to accomplish more than they would without us. Make sense? All right. So now, so then what keeps people stuck? How many people have been to boot camp? And if you went to boot camp, except for the last couple of times because I stopped teaching this class on conflict resolution. But if you went to my class on conflict resolution, then you know the answer to this next question I'm asking. But what keeps people stuck?
Fear.
Who said it back here? Fear. Right? Now let me explain what I mean by that. I believe, now, many of you know that I was a counselor. I'm a licensed therapist, and that I counseled before I came to Scentsy. In that experience that I had, I learned something fairly quickly that was only supported over time, and that was that everybody coming into my office seemed to have the same problem at the root. Now they all described it different, circumstances were always different, but the problem ultimately when we got to it was the same. And it was always some type of conflict within themselves or with someone else in a relationship. And that conflict was always based in the same exact thing, which is fear. Then the next question becomes, fear of what? Right? And if you attended my class at boot camp, and I'm going to take you through this quickly, we went through an exercise to discover what all issues, all emotionally charged issues, come back to fear of the very same thing. And I'm not going to take all of you through that because it just takes too much time. But what is that? Those of you that attended that class.
Being alone.
Being alone. All of us are ultimately afraid of being alone. Now let me tell you just one quick story just to cement that. And it's the story of brown grass, if you've heard it before, but for those that haven't. My brother, who used to work at Scentsy, who's the VP of Marketing Communications, built a house on an acre of land, I think it was. Anyway, he had lots of grass. And he planted the grass himself because he couldn't afford sod after he built that house. And he had his sprinkling system set up, and as that grass grew in, there was these big brown spots. Now, the house was in a very nice neighborhood, where all the lawns and everything were meticulously maintained. But he was very emotionally upset, so I asked him, hey, why are you so upset about this brown grass? And he said, well, look at everybody else's grass. They do such a better job at maintaining their yards than I do. Well, why does that matter? Well, because they're obviously better at taking care of things. They're better at providing for their family. And I'm shortening this discussion quite a bit. Well, why does that matter? Well, because then I'm not a good provider. Well, why does that matter? If I'm not a good provider, that's what my family needs from me. And if I'm not a good provider, then they will abandon and leave me. Now, he didn't know this right at the beginning, right, when he first said that. He didn't know that the reason he was having a strong emotional reaction to brown grass was because he was afraid of being alone and abandoned. But that's what it was. Now, my brown grass is by design. I don't have an emotional reaction to brown grass because what I want, my goal is to keep the grass barely alive so that it doesn't grow,
Turf.
but not dead so that I don't have to spend the money to replace it. Does that make sense? That's my objective. So there's no strong emotional reaction, so that doesn't tie to my fear of being alone and abandoned, but for my brother it did. Does that make sense? And you can take any issue, any emotionally charged issue, and you can drill down to why do I feel the way I feel about it, and ultimately you will come down to I'm afraid, and I'm afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of being insignificant. I'm afraid of being worthless. I'm afraid of being inadequate. I'm afraid of being weak. I'm afraid of being rejected. Does that make sense? that fuels so much of what we do and are or aren't in our lives that it becomes problematic. And every problem, ultimately, every problem that I encountered in counseling had the roots in this one feeling, which is kind of nice as a counselor, right? Because when somebody comes into your office, before they even start talking to you, you know what the problem is. That's kind of nice.
Save a lot of money.
You just don't know how they're going to present it, and then the challenge becomes getting them to see it on their own without you just lecturing to them about it, right? Because then they have the motivation to change. But this becomes ultimately the problem. It's the fear of being alone, and that causes the variety of problems that we have in our lives. So this is supported by Mother Teresa. Now, I've used this quote before, but I think it's so powerful, and it fit this presentation that I have to use again. Mother Teresa says that the biggest disease today is not leprosy or tuberculosis, but rather the feeling of being unwanted, uncared for, and deserted by everyone. The greatest evil is the lack of love. And I can tell you that, again, reflecting back on my counseling experience, I will tie this back, I promise, but reflecting back on my counseling experience, one of the things that always struck me, even to the point of often tears, is that I often realized that people were coming and paying me to be a friend. That they literally had no one in their lives to tell their troubles to. They had no soft place to land. None. And so they would pay me $100 an hour to be a soft place for them. To me, that was incredibly sad. It still is. But that's because, and you heard John say it yesterday, people are starving for this, right? He called it hope. But it's the same thing. People are starving for it. Mother Teresa saw it. She was dealing with people who actually were starving to death, right? That's where she focused her time. But what she said was the greatest evil, the thing that she saw that was most needed, was this idea of love and compassion. All right? Oh, it is already. All right. So, fear is what keeps us small, but love is the antidote to that. And that's what you want as a leader, right? You want people to expand, to be more. We talked about the goal. So if you are not, if you do not care, the one thing that you need to be an effective leader more than anything else is you need to know how to love and how to care. Now, you can't, in some cases you might not be able to muster that, right? I don't want you to leave here with kind of this feeling that in all cases you have to be this loving person. Just know that if you don't have those feelings of love and compassion and caring for someone else, you're probably not going to be the person whose name comes up when that person gets asked who's the best leader in their life and has the most impact on you, right? That's just the reality of it. That's okay. You don't have to be that person for everybody, but where you have the opportunity to be that person, then be that person. Rudolph Giuliani, after 9/11, said this: "During the dark days of 9/11, I realized that revealing your love and compassion doesn't weaken your leadership, it makes it stronger. Love helps us look beyond what's best for ourselves and focus on what's best for others. And at the root of it, love, not duty, is what makes a firefighter run into a flaming building to save someone that he or she has never met." All right, now I need to tell you another story. As I said, this framework. John Bowlby. John Bowlby was a psychologist out of London. And after World War II, the United Nations realized that they had a health concern that they needed to address. There had been great advances in understanding that of disease and infection, and that cleaning up the hospitals and making them sterile